A devastating eviction crisis is rapidly worsening all around the country, and it's threatening to push millions of families out of their homes this holiday season. Even though there was a brief pause in evictions after the moratorium ended in September, that didn't happen because the number of filings had decreased, but because courts were extremely overwhelmed with a record backlog of unprocessed filings. Now, housing advocates are saying that the number of evictions has started to rise at an alarmingly high pace in many parts of the United States. Courts have just started to catch up on the backlog of eviction cases. The latest upsurge highlights the limits of federal emergency rental assistance in places where distribution remains slow and safety nets for tenants are incredibly weak. Soaring housing prices in many markets are also playing a role as landlords rush to evict non-paying tenants to sell their properties at record prices. Recent data released by the Eviction Lab at Princeton University has shown that eviction rates have been escalating in all of the 31 cities and 6 states where it collects data. Evictions in September jumped by 10.4% from August. In October, the month-to-month rate climbed to 38%, and according to the U.S. Census Bureau's Household Pulse survey, in November, the number of households claiming they weren't confident in their ability to pay next month's rent went up from about 5 million to 6.3 million in the latest data. Among places where eviction rates are spiking are Connecticut, Houston, Indianapolis, and Cincinnati, Columbus, Ohio. Florida is also seeing a significant uptick in filings in the cities of Tampa and Gainesville, according to the Eviction Lab. Now, the biggest problem is that government officials are not assessing the severity of the problem. The federal government believes it has already done everything in its power to prevent an eviction tsunami. In fact, officials are truly convinced that the poorly distributed rental assistance program has effectively averted a disaster. But the truth is that mass evictions didn't occur all at once because many courts were only running part-time due to mandates related to the health crisis, and they still have an enormous excess of cases to litigate and millions of hearings to make while the number of filings continue to pile up. Ben Martin, the senior researcher at Texas Houses, a nonprofit focused on housing issues, said that he was particularly disturbed by the initial commentaries issued by government officials after the moratorium ended, saying that, well, there wasn't a tsunami, so we don't have an eviction crisis on our hands. That initial narrative was somewhat misleading. What we're seeing now is a reflection of reality, which is that evictions take time to work their way into and through the court system, Martin stressed. One of the greatest concerns for housing advocates is that some landlords who got federal assistance are still evicting tenants. A survey of roughly 120 attorneys nationwide, conducted by the National Housing Law Project, has exposed that 86% had seen cases like this. They also saw many cases of landlords bluntly lying in court to evict tenants and illegally throwing tenants out of their homes. In many states, landlord-tenant law is antiquated and designed to provide results for landlords, explained Seamus Roller, executive director of the National Housing Law Project. Instead of adjudicating the facts, courts function as conveyor belts, moving tenants toward eviction. Among those who affirm they were illegally evicted is Faye Moore. In October, the 72-year-old returned home from work to find all of her belongings spread out on the sidewalk. Moore had a rent debt of several $1,000s on her 2-bedroom townhouse in an Atlanta suburb, but she expected to have a chance to present her case before a judge because she tried to pay her rent for months, but management refused to take it, and she was given no notice before she was evicted. "I'm devastated. It was a house full of furniture, everything," she said. Moore, a retired mental health therapist, lived in that property with a 61-year-old partner for years. "It was like a storm came in and devastated everything. I can't find my important papers or anything," she added. The attorney responsible for her case was terribly frustrated to hear that she had been thrown out in the street. "I'm angry that anyone would put an elderly couple out without trying to figure out what resources are there," Murray said. "We're still in the middle of a health crisis. You are putting people in precarious situations who are some of the most fragile." Moore lived in a property owned by a big rent company, but roughly 50% of landlords around the nation are small family businesses. Some people tend to think that all landlord-tenant relationships are tense. While they certainly can become so, small landlords are often not who you expect. They do not have the same financial cushion a big corporation does, so when this group starts losing money, their ability to meet mortgage payments is significantly reduced. Small landlords who own a handful of apartments have also faced significant hardships to get by during the recession. Some of them have been saddled with months of back rent they may never get back. Others were forced to lay off maintenance staff or sell units as they awaited federal rental assistance that was exceedingly slow to be distributed. The truth is that navigating the country's patchwork of changing rules and regulations requires a lot of time and resources, and it's safe to say that many landlords and their tenants didn't have any of these options. Millions of Americans on the verge of losing their homes were incredibly stressed out, often working overnight shifts or 2 jobs, while others have been disproportionately affected by the eviction crisis because they belong to a vulnerable group. That's the case of Freddie Davis. Right after losing his trucking job, his landlord almost doubled the rent on his Miami apartment. Davis couldn't keep up with his rent payments, and soon after, he was evicted. Now he's barely getting by in a hotel and being aided by a nonprofit that helps homeless people. The 51-year-old desperately wants to find a new place to live, but that seems impossible on his $1,000 a month disability check. We live in America, and the thing is, people like me, we gotta go to the street if we don't have no other place to go because we can't afford rent, said Davis, who lost a leg to diabetes, suffers congestive heart failure, and is recovering from multiple wounds on his other leg and foot. "I really can't do nothing," he adds. On the flip side, the rental market is booming like never before. As more and more Americans are completely priced out of the housing market and turn to rent to find a place to live, demand has gotten so strong that prices are rising 3 times faster than in 2020. The latest report from CoreLogic indicates that single-family rents in October were up 10.9% year-over-year, which is 3 times the 3.2% annual growth seen in October 2020. The extraordinary surge comes as too much demand meets not enough supply. Vacancy rates on these homes are now at a 25-year low, as an increasingly competitive and pricey for sale housing market drives more potential buyers to rentals, outlines the report. Single-family rent growth hit its 6th consecutive record high in October 2021, mirroring record price increases in the for-sale housing market, pointed Molly Boesel, the principal economist at CoreLogic. The highest gains in rent prices are being recorded in properties owned by big companies or millionaire investors who've been piling into the market, buying lower-priced homes and turning them into rentals for a profit. This is not only worsening the supply constraints and keeping millions of potential buyers out of the housing market, but also manipulating prices to levels most working poor Americans simply cannot afford. So, as we move towards the end of the year, there are plenty of signs that eviction cases will keep rising. In places where rental assistance has been slow to be delivered, eviction cases are already piling up. But no one is tracking it. That's because the United States does not have a national system that monitors eviction cases in real time. The largest set of publicly available data is collected by Princeton's Eviction Lab, which only tracks cases in 6 states and 31 cities. In essence, it's easy to say that there was no eviction tsunami when courts have been struggling to process all of the cases and when no one is actually monitoring eviction rates. "My frustration is widespread," lamented Brent Thompson, the executive director for East River Legal Services, which provides representation to low-income residents in eastern South Dakota. "It's just sad when you see a continuing problem day in and day out, and there's only so much you can do for them." Thompson revealed that his office recorded a 30% increase in eviction cases for 4 months in a row this year, and he said that the need for attorneys is growing. In his region, there are only 8 attorneys to handle the cases of thousands of low-income workers and other groups that have historically been exploited by landlords. Dan Atkins, the executive director of Community Legal Aid Society, Inc., says that more than 80% of landlords are represented in eviction cases, while fewer than 5% of tenants have lawyers by their side. "There's not enough legal aid to go around," Atkins said. "We're starting to see the floodgates open a bit, and we're looking over our shoulder and wondering if it's going to be a big tidal wave soon," he continued. With millions of children already homeless in America, housing advocates just released some shocking statistics suggesting that an additional 500,000 households with children are under threat of eviction this winter. While the number of homeless children in America is estimated at 1.6 million, many studies indicate the number could be far higher, as homeless statistics are often underreported at the city, county, and state levels. When you're struggling to pay rent or have an eviction notice hanging over you, the worry can be consuming, explains Polly Neat, chief executive of a homeless shelter. "Oftentimes it's impossible to hide it from your kids, even though these are adult fears no parents want their child to experience. Millions of parents will spend sleepless nights this Christmas worrying about the eviction notice is coming, where they will go, and if their next so-called home is going to be a gloomy hotel," Neat added, saying that her shelter's emergency helpline is receiving more calls about eviction than it did at the peak of the health crisis, as thousands of families fight to keep a roof over their heads. One of the parents worried about the future of their children is Masanga Mwanko, who lives in a Portland home with his 3 kids. As days go by and bills pile up, Mwanko is part of the growing number of households at risk of eviction in Oregon, even as he awaits assistance from the state. The 36-year-old father said, "We are going into winter and in a period of celebration. And yet, you also have this thing at the back of your mind that this place that we call home might not actually be our home much longer. We get calls from people every day who are in this situation," revealed Sybil Hebb, the director of legislative advocacy for the Oregon Law Center. "The overwhelming word I would use to describe those calls is just pervasive desperation and fear." Hebb exposed that since July, he's seen over 3,000 eviction proceedings filed in Oregon for non-payment, and thousands more cases are still being processed each week. "If we let families down, we're going to be pushing people into the real threat of homelessness. It's unconscionable not to take steps to prevent that," Hebb said. Margaret Salazar, the director of Oregon Housing and Community Services, explained, "Even if someone has started a new job and they're now employed, they may still have thousands of dollars of back rent that are owed. This is not a crisis of numbers, it's a crisis of people," Mwanko continued. "People that are actually trying to get ahead and who have been derailed by the recession, not by fault of their own, and not because they're lazy," the father of 3 emphasized. To call it a disaster is an understatement. America's housing instability and eviction crisis are becoming a major national emergency that our leaders keep refusing to look at. Our housing crisis is simply catastrophic, and we must treat it with seriousness before millions of hard-working Americans are pushed into a poverty spiral that will be exceedingly difficult to recover from. This is going to be a very difficult winter for many families across the country. Things have started to spin out of control, and we should all pay very close attention to the coming events, because many challenges are still waiting for us in the future.